He invited her to Montana as a mail-order bride, then humiliated her at the station for not having the right curves and told her to leave. Jared Wells thought he could treat women like merchandise, judged only by appearances. But Marianne didn't run. She stayed, endured, and met Cole Brady, a man who saw her strength, not her shape. But just wait until you see how this story turns, and why justice, in the end, came full circle. Marianne Hart stood on the edge of a new life, clutching a letter that still smelled faintly of cologne and old ink. The handwriting, elegant, almost theatrical, wound across the page like ivy, promising warmth, stability, and the simple kind of love that grows from quiet earth and honest work. She was 26, soft-spoken, with large, thoughtful eyes and the kind of presence that asked for nothing and expected even less. In her small Ohio town, she was the girl everyone forgot in group photos, the one who helped others pack up their lives while hers stood still. So, when the ad in the newspaper offered a way out, a serious gentleman seeking a wholesome bride to join him on his Montana ranch, she didn't just apply. She hoped, she believed. She poured her heart into every sentence of her reply, folding it like a prayer. The man was Jared Wells, a respected rancher with thousands of acres of grazing land, deep pockets, and a reputation for being steady, hard-working, and kind. He wrote back with promises of partnership, of building a life together. She didn't fall in love with the man exactly, but with the idea that someone, somewhere, was waiting just for her. 3 weeks later, she stepped off the train in dusty, wide-skied Montana, her only suitcase held tight and her best dress pressed flat against her knees by the wind. She looked for the kind eyes she'd imagined from his letters. Instead, she met the cold, appraising stare of a man who looked her over once, briefly, clinically, and let out a scoff. His hat shaded most of his face, but not the twist of his mouth. He nodded at her chest, then muttered loud enough for her to hear, "So nature skipped you too, huh? I asked for feminine. This ain't it. Letters off. Go home." She blinked. Once. Twice. Words refused to form. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Around her, the station was dead silent. The last stagecoach had long since rolled away. No taxis, no reception desk, just acres of red clay, a single bench, and the echo of her humiliation. She stood still as his truck kicked up dust and vanished into the blur of fields. No warm welcome, no handshake, no future, just her, $32 to her name, a hand-me-down suitcase, and a rusted brooch her mother once told her was for special occasions. This had been special until it wasn't. She didn't cry. She just sat down slowly on the bench, tucked the letter back into her coat pocket like it was still worth something, and looked out across the endless stretch of land. Montana wasn't what she'd imagined, but she was here now, and she wasn't going back. The barn smelled of rusted iron, cracked wood, and horses that never truly slept. That's where Marianne spent her first night. No one invited her into the main house. No one offered her a pillow, a blanket, or even a glance. She made a bed of hay in the corner stall, just far enough from the drafty door to stay warm, but close enough to escape quickly if anyone told her she didn't belong there either. She lay awake staring at the beams above, listening to the shifting hooves of animals more welcoming than the people on this ranch. The next morning, Jared passed by on his ATV. He didn't stop, just slowed enough to shout over the engine, "If you're not leaving, don't get in the way. We've got work to do." And that was that. She wasn't paid. She wasn't even named. But she picked up a bucket and followed the trail to the stables. She fed the pigs, brushed down the horses, hauled hay bales twice her size, and learned, by watching, to milk the cows before the sun got too high. No one told her what to do. No one told her to stop. The men watched her. Some whispered. A few laughed when she struggled with the gate latch or tripped carrying feed. Once, as she bent down to collect spilled grain, someone tossed a bra at her feet and said loud enough for others to hear, "Might help her feel more like a woman." Laughter. She said nothing. Her hands cracked open from the dry air and rough rope, her nails chipped, her back stiffened from bending too long. But she never complained, never asked for less, never raised her voice. Her silence unnerved some, emboldened others. But it didn't protect her from the scorn in Jared's eyes. To him, she was a shadow on the ranch, a reminder of a decision he now called a mistake. A presence he neither acknowledged nor accepted. One evening just before supper, she accidentally knocked over a metal pail outside the smokehouse. The clang echoed. Men looked up. Jared's voice sliced through the dusk. "You're no good in the barn. Maybe you're kitchen material. Try not to ruin that too." She flinched, but didn't move. The humiliation stung more than the sunburn across her neck. And then, from the back porch, someone spoke. A voice like thunder on still earth. Slow, low, steady. "Hey!" The word stopped everything. From the shadows stepped a tall man in worn denim, sleeves rolled to the elbow, arms crossed. "That's enough. You're supposed to run this place like a man, not like a coward." Jared stared back but didn't reply. The others turned their heads. No one laughed now. Marianne didn't look up, but in her chest something uncoiled. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Respect, after all, is a sound, and she'd just heard it for the first time in days. His name was Cole Brady. Among the ranch hands, he was the one no one dared cross, not because he barked orders or threw his weight around. He didn't need to. Cole had the kind of presence that made men straighten up when he walked by. He never raised his voice, never wasted words, but when he looked at you, you knew exactly where you stood. He was the strongest man on the property. Physically, yes, but in other ways, too. The kind of strength that didn't need to be proven, only quietly carried. Word was he'd served in the Marines, 2 tours overseas, one scar on his left hand he never talked about. He'd come back a different man, settled in Montana for the quiet, and chose the ranch not for money, but for peace. People respected him because he respected himself. He didn't gossip, didn't drink, didn't touch what wasn't his. Marianne had seen him from afar over the last few weeks. Working before sunrise, tools over his shoulder, sleeves rolled to the elbows, moving like someone who understood the land better than words. She never expected him to notice her, and she certainly never expected what came next. That evening, after Jared humiliated her in front of the others, his voice loud, mocking, designed to sting, Marianne kept her head down and went back to work. Her hands trembled slightly on the feed bucket, but she didn't let the tears fall. She was finishing up near the stables when she heard boots approach on gravel. She turned, bracing for another careless remark, but it was Cole. He held out a metal bucket, the handle worn from years of use. "Come on," he said, his voice low but clear. "I'll show you how to cut grass for the foal. He's teething bad." That was all. No preamble, no judgment, just an offer. She followed without speaking. They walked in near silence, past the pens and out toward the edge of the pasture, where the wild grass swayed in the late evening light. Cole handed her a short, curved blade and showed her how to cut with long, gentle strokes, clean even, so the stems stayed soft. He explained it once, then watched as she tried. When her hands fumbled, he corrected her grip, but never touched her. When she succeeded, he gave a quiet nod, the kind of nod that felt like acknowledgement. And that, for Marianne, was everything. She realized, standing there beside him in the gold of a Montana sunset, that this was the first man in her life who didn't ask what she could offer, or try to take something first. He didn't look at her like she was broken. He didn't look at her like she was anything less than whole. When they returned to the barn, the light had nearly gone. She turned to thank him, her voice uncertain but sincere. "I mean it," she said. "You didn't have to, but thank you." He looked at her for a moment, just a breath longer than polite, not in a way that made her feel self-conscious, but in a way that made her feel seen. Then he gave a single respectful nod and walked away. That night she slept better than she had since arriving. No dreams, no doubts, just a slow, quiet warmth she couldn't quite name. The next morning she woke before dawn and stepped out to begin her chores. On the bench outside the barn sat a pair of clean, thick work gloves. Next to them, a silver thermos, steam still rising from the lid, and under it a folded scrap of brown paper. She opened it slowly. 3 words written in blocky, careful handwriting. Start with strength. She didn't smile, but something inside her stood up a little straighter. 3 weeks passed. Enough time for the dust on Marianne's boots to feel like skin. Enough time for the calluses onto her hands to stop cracking. Enough time for the men who once whispered behind her back to start falling silent when she walked by. She wasn't just present on the ranch anymore. She was part of it. By then, she could reverse the field tractor better than half the hands. She could stack hay bales without stumbling and repair a snapped harness faster than most. Cole never said much, but he showed up every time she needed to learn something new. Not to lecture, just to stand beside her and do the thing once, then let her try. He taught her to shoot, not because she asked, but because the coyotes had been circling the goat pens, and he figured it was time she could defend herself if she had to. His lessons were simple. No flair, no ego, just action. Steady wrist. Let the recoil surprise you. Never rush the second shot. That's the one that counts. She listened, learned, practiced. He showed her how to make soup from bone marrow and wild herbs when the supply truck got delayed. He taught her how to calm a skittish horse with just her voice, and eventually how to win the trust of a battered old cattle dog named Hank, a mutt no one could ever get close to. But Hank took to her, laid his head on her foot one morning while she fed the goats, and somehow that meant more than words ever could. Still, what grew between her and Cole wasn't romance. It wasn't a crush, not even longing. It was something else, something rarer, stability. He looked at her differently, not with hunger, not with pity, but with recognition, like he saw not just who she was, but what it had taken to get there. He never brought up the past, never asked about Jared, never tried to fix her. But she knew that when she dropped a tool, he'd be the one handing it back without a word. When her shoulder trembled from lifting too much, he'd tighten the straps without being asked. One evening, they sat quietly on overturned crates outside the barn, watching the last sliver of sunlight sink behind the hills. They didn't speak for a long time, and then, out of nowhere, he said it, not looking at her, just speaking to the space between them, like it needed to be said out loud once. You've taken more out here than most men I've seen under fire. I mean that. I've seen guys fold in cobble over half of what you've dealt with. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her throat locked, and something inside her tightened so sharply she had to clench her fists just to stay still. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. No one had ever called her strong before. No one had ever said she'd survived something, much less with that kind of reverence. And from him? It wasn't flattery. It was truth, raw, unvarnished, and exactly what her soul had needed to hear. It happened on a Tuesday. The skies were clear, the air heavy with the scent of dust and livestock. Marianne had just finished restacking feed when the crunch of tires on gravel made every head turn toward the front gate. The truck was familiar. Too familiar. Jared Wells climbed out with the same smug air he'd worn the day he first met her. But this time, his boots were scuffed, and his once pristine belt sagged from wear. He wasn't the man from the letters. Not anymore. He looked thinner, meaner, like resentment had become his only fuel. Word spread fast. He'd been kicked off the neighboring ranch for piling up debts and burning bridges. And now, somehow, he thought he still had something to claim. He swaggered into the yard like he still owned it. Well, well, he drawled, looking around at the men. Looks like my investment's been busy. His eyes locked on Marianne, who stood near the water trough, hands still stained with grease from the tractor. You've got grit, I'll give you that, he said. But don't forget, you came here on my letter. So, technically, some of this? He gestured around the barn. Still mine. No one spoke. The other hands kept working, but slower now, watching. Then Jared took another step forward, voice louder now. I could still change my mind, you know. Be gracious. Let bygones be bygones. He gave a pointed glance at Cole, who had just stepped out from the shadows near the stables. But really, Let's be honest here. Me or this cucumber? He chuckled, smug and sharp. Come on, Mar. You're not seriously choosing this over a real man, are you? Silence. Marianne didn't flinch. She didn't lower her eyes. She looked at him, straight and steady, and something in her expression shifted. Gone was the girl who had stood stunned at the train station. What stood before him now was a woman who had shoveled troughs, faced humiliation, earned every blister and bruise, and never once asked for pity. Her voice was calm, clear, like glass that didn't need to shatter to cut. Jared, she said, you wanted curves. She paused, letting the words settle. I wanted character. The silence that followed was the kind that hummed with heat. And then Cole stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch Jared. But the space between them crackled with something unspoken and unmistakable. Cole stood tall, shoulders square, jaw tight, eyes cold. He leaned in just enough for Jared to feel the weight of every word. Leave. Beat. Or I'll bury your reputation deeper than your IQ. No one laughed. No one needed to. Jared opened his mouth to speak, closed it, glanced around, realizing finally that not a single man on that ranch would back him. Not this time. He turned, got into the truck, and didn't look back. After Jared left, the ranch slowly returned to its rhythm. But Cole didn't. For days, he barely spoke. He kept to his routine, up before sunrise, handling the roughest chores. Always a steady presence in the distance, but something about him had shifted inward. He wasn't cold, just quieter than usual. Marianne noticed. She always noticed. When she passed him tools, he thanked her with a nod. When they worked side by side, he offered no small talk, only silence. And yet, that silence felt full, like a room waiting for someone to turn on the light. It wasn't until they found themselves alone again, out by the east paddock, brushing down a skittish mare, that she finally spoke. You've been different, she said gently, not accusing, just curious. Cole paused, hand resting on the horse's flank. For a moment, it seemed he wouldn't answer. Then, without turning, he said in a voice low and steady, I don't like getting in people's business. A beat. But when I saw the way he talked to you, it hit something. Deep. He stepped back from the horse, brushing off his palms, his eyes on the horizon now. My mother, he said. She worked 3 shifts, cleaning, nursing, sewing, whatever she could. I'd see her come home with knees bruised from kneeling, fingers raw from bleach. His voice thickened slightly, not from emotion, but memory. And every man she ever worked with, they saw her from the back, or the front, never from the inside, never her heart. Marianne said nothing, not at first, but then, softly, deliberately, she reached out and placed her hand on top of his. It was a small gesture, quiet, unshaken, but it said more than comfort. It said, I know that pain too. He didn't pull away, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a fragile truth that had lived unspoken in her for years. You are the first man who's ever talked to me without looking below my chin. He looked at her then, really looked, and smiled. Not the smile of charm, not the kind meant to impress or flirt, but something rarer, a smile of respect, a recognition of shared ground, of earned dignity, the kind of smile that grows only from soil that's been tilled by hardship and watered by silence. There was no passion in it, no rush, no promise, only this, I see you, and I stand with you. And somehow, in that moment it was enough. There was no aisle, no flower arrangements, no white chairs or hired musicians, just a small clearing behind the barn, open sky above, a soft breeze in the grass, and the scent of pine drifting in from the tree line. That was their wedding, no invitations, no crowd, only those who mattered. Hank, the old cattle dog, sat curled quietly at their feet, tail flicking contentedly. 2 bees hovered near a wild daisy, and behind them the barn stood steady, weathered and scarred, but still standing, just like them. Marianne wore a dress she'd sewn herself, stitched by hand in the quiet hours after chores. It wasn't elaborate. No corset, no lace she couldn't afford, no sewn-in expectations. It moved with the wind and fit like something real, because that's what it was. No padding, no pretense. Just her. Cole stood across from her in the same shirt he wore every morning. Faded blue, sleeves rolled just above the wrist. His palms were still calloused from that morning's work, and his boots had dust clinging to the soles. But his eyes held a stillness that didn't need words. When the moment came, he didn't rush, he didn't fumble. He simply leaned in, gently, without force, and kissed her, slowly, like a man who had spent most of his life on the move and had finally found the one place he didn't want to leave. There was no applause, no music swell, only breath, only warmth, only presence. And for Marianne, it was enough, more than enough. In that kiss, in that moment, she understood something she hadn't dared name before. Her body had been judged, dismissed, sized up, reduced. But her heart, that quiet, unyielding thing inside her, had always been bigger than the world's expectations, stronger than the men who looked past her, more enduring than the doubt that tried to shrink her. She didn't need mirrors anymore. She didn't need permission. Because the man who stood across from her didn't see her for what the world wanted her to be. He saw her for who she already was, and that, finally, was enough. It was early morning when Marianne stepped out onto the porch, her newborn son wrapped snug against her chest, his breath warm and steady beneath a soft wool blanket. The sky above the Montana hills blushed pale pink, the first light of day breaking slow and soft across the land. The fields were quiet. Even the chickens hadn't started fussing yet. The mailbox creaked when she opened it. Inside lay one envelope, cream-colored, its edges slightly bent from the cold air, and her name written in handwriting she didn't recognize. She paused. There was something about the way her name was written, carefully, almost cautiously, that made her chest tighten. She carried it inside, set her son in the cradle beside the stove, and sat at the long pine table, where she now wrote bills, grocery lists, and notes to Cole on where she'd hidden the last slice of pie. She'd opened the envelope and began to read. Dear Marianne, I hope you don't find this strange. My name is Ellie, and I was invited to a ranch by a man named Jared Wells. He sent me letters, said all the things a woman alone wants to hear, said he needed someone real, said he'd been burned before. I arrived 3 days ago. On the second night I ran, Marianne's hands froze, but her heart didn't. It surged forward. He told me I owed him something, said I was a waste of time. He laughed when I cried. I asked someone at the general store if anyone had ever made it work with him. They mentioned you. I don't know what I'm hoping for by writing this. I just wanted to tell someone who might understand. She folded the letter slowly, staring at the edges, her mind suddenly full of images. That first night in the barn, sleeping on hay that scratched her skin. Jared's voice, cold and dismissive. The way the other ranch hands had smirked as she broke her back trying to earn a sliver of dignity. She remembered the sting of it, but what rose up stronger than the memory was the difference. Where she stood now, who she had become. She reached for her pen, steady now, with the kind of confidence that wasn't loud, but impossible to move, and she began to write. Dear Ellie, if you're reading this, then yes, I understand, more than I wish I did. There was a time when I believed every word Jared wrote, every flourish of his compliments, every promise tucked between lines. I packed my bag with hope and a single brooch from my mother. I arrived thinking I'd find a partner. Instead, I found silence, mockery, and a man who measured worth by inches and shame. But here's what I've learned, and what I hope you will too. Your value has never lived in your appearance. Not in your figure, not in your weight, not in the curve of your smile, or the softness of your voice. Your value lives in the way you stay kind, even after cruelty, in the way you carry yourself when no one claps, in the fact that you left, that you walked, that you knew somewhere inside yourself, this isn't love. You were right to run, and if you're still searching, come here. Come to Montana. We don't promise you perfection, just peace, and people who won't ask you to shrink to fit their vision. We keep a place open. For you, for women like us, for the ones who were told they were not enough, and still got up anyway. Come if you want. Come when you're ready. We'll be waiting. With warmth, Marianne Hart Brady. She set down the pen, took a breath, then walked to the fridge and pulled down the small photograph, edges curling just slightly from the steam of nearby coffee pots and long laughter-filled dinners. In the photo, she stood barefoot in the grass, hair braided, Cole's arm gently around her waist. Their son sat in her lap, round-faced and curious, one small hand gripping the collar of Hank, the old cattle dog who had once trusted no one, but now never left their side. They weren't posing. They were simply being. She tucked the photo into the envelope next to the letter and sealed it carefully. Out on the porch, the morning sun had finally crested over the hills. It warmed the rails, glinted off the tin roof. And as she slipped the letter into the mailbox, she didn't just send it to a stranger. She sent it to a version of herself. To the girl who had once stood in the middle of a dusty road with $32 and no way home. And in doing so, she let her go. Let her rest. Because now that girl had become a woman who could offer shelter. Not just a bed, but belonging. And somewhere, maybe hundreds of miles away, a young woman named Ellie would one day open an envelope, read a letter, and see a photo. 3 people, smiling, at peace, and absolutely, completely real.